Hello and welcome to God Talk. I'm JC, your host. Today's Bible reading is going to be Leviticus 4, 5, and 7, and Acts 14. I'm reading out of the Good News Translation. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Leviticus 4. Leviticus 4 reads, "The Lord commanded Moses to tell the people of Israel that anyone who sinned and broke any of the Lord's commandments without intending to would have to observe the following rules. If it is the high priest who sins and so brings guilt on the people, he shall present a young bull without any defects and sacrifice it to the Lord for his sin. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent, put his hand on his head, and kill it there in the Lord's presence. Then the high priest shall take some of the bull's blood and carry it into the tent. He shall dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle it in front of the sacred curtain 7 times. Then he shall put some of the blood on the projections at the corners of the incense altar in the tent. He shall pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar used for the burning sacrifices, which is at the entrance of the tent. From this bull he shall take all the fat on the internal organs, the kidneys and the fat on them, and the best part of the liver. The priest shall take this fat and burn it on the altar used for the burnt offerings, just as he does with the fat from the animal killed for the fellowship offering. But he shall take its skin, all its flesh, its head, its legs, and its internal organs, including the intestines, carry it all outside the camp to the ritually clean place where the ashes are poured out, and there he shall burn it on a wood fire. If it is the whole community of Israel that sins and becomes guilty of breaking one of the Lord's commandments without intending to, then as soon as the sin becomes known, the community shall bring the young bull as a sin offering. They shall bring it to the tent of the Lord's presence. The leaders of the community shall put their hands on its head, and it shall be killed there. The high priest shall take some of the bull's blood into the tent, dip his finger in it, and sprinkle it in front of the curtain 7 times. He shall put some of the blood on the projections at the corners of the incense altar inside the tent and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar used for burning sacrifices, which is at the entrance of the tent. Then he shall take all its fat and burn it on the altar. He shall do the same thing with this bull as he does with the bull for the sin offering. In this way he shall make the sacrifice for the people's sin, and they will be forgiven. Then he shall take the bull outside the camp and burn it, just as he burns the bull offered for his own sin. This is an offering to take away the sin of the community. If it is a ruler who sins and becomes guilty of breaking one of the Lord's commandments without intending to, then as soon as the sin is called to his attention, he shall bring as his offering a male goat without any defects. He shall put his hand on its head and kill it in the north side, kill it on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. This is an offering to take away the sin. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood of the animal, put it on the projections at the corners of the altar, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Then he shall burn all of its fat on the altar, just as he burns the fat of the animals killed for the fellowship offerings. In this way the priest shall offer the sacrifice for the sin of the ruler, and you shall be forgiven. If any of you people sin and become guilty of breaking one of the Lord's commandments without intending to, then as soon as the sin is called to your attention, you shall bring as your offering a female goat without any defects. You shall put your hands on its head and kill it on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood of the animal, put it on the projections at the corners of the altar, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Then he shall remove all its fat, just as the fat is removed from the animals killed for the fellowship offerings, and he shall burn it on the altar as an odor pleasing to the Lord. In this way the priest shall offer the sacrifice for the man's sin, and he will be forgiven. If you bring a sheep as a sin offering, it must be a female without any defects. You shall put your hand on its head and kill it on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood of the animal, put it on the projections at the corners of the altar, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar. Then he shall remove all its fat, just as the fat is removed from the sheep killed for the fellowship offering, and he shall burn it on the altar along with the food offerings given to the Lord. In this way the priest shall offer the sacrifice for your sin, and you will be forgiven. Leviticus 5. Sin offerings are required in the following cases. If you are officially summoned to give evidence in a court and do not give information about something you have seen or heard, you must suffer the consequences. If you unintentionally touch anything ritually unclean, such as a dead animal, you are unclean and guilty as soon as you realize what you have done. If you unintentionally touch any of human organ, anything of human origin that is unclean, whatever it may be, you are guilty as soon as you realize what you have done. If you make a careless vow, no matter what it's about, you are guilty as soon as you realize what you have done. When you are guilty, you must confess the sin, and as a penalty for your sin, you must bring to the Lord a female sheep or a goat as an offering. The priest shall offer the sacrifice for your sin. If you cannot afford a sheep or a goat, you shall bring to the Lord as payment for your sin 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. You shall bring them to the priest, who will first offer the bird for the sin offering. He will break its neck without pulling off its head and sprinkle some of its blood against the side of the altar. The rest of the blood will be drained out at the base of the altar. This is an offering to take away sin. Then he shall offer the second bird as a burnt offering according to the regulations. In this way, In this way the priest shall offer the sacrifice for your sin, and you will be forgiven. If you cannot afford 2 doves or 2 pigeons, you shall bring 2 pounds of flour as a sin offering. You shall not put any olive oil or any incense on it, because it is a sin offering, not a grain offering. You shall bring it to the priest, who will take a handful of it as a token that it has all been offered to the Lord, and he will burn it on the altar as a food offering. It is an offering to take away sin. In this way the priest shall offer a sacrifice for your sin, and you will be forgiven. The rest of the flour belongs to the priest, just as in the case of a grain offering. The Lord gave the following regulations to Moses. If any of you sin unintentionally by failing to hand over the payments that are sacred to the Lord, you shall bring as your repayment offering to the Lord a male sheep or a goat without any defects. Its value is to be determined according to the official standard. You must make the payments you have failed to hand over and must pay an additional 20%. You shall give it to the priest, and the priest shall offer the animal as a sacrifice for your sin. You will be forgiven. If any of you sin unintentionally by breaking any of the Lord's commandments, you are guilty and must pay the penalty. You must bring to the priest as repayment offering a male sheep or goat without any defects. Its value is to be determined according to the official standard. The priest shall offer the sacrifice for the sin which you have committed unintentionally, and you will be forgiven. It is a repayment offering for the sin you committed against the Lord. Leviticus 6. The Lord gave the following regulations to Moses. As an offering to be made, if any of you sin against the Lord, by refusing to return what another Israelite has left as a deposit, or by stealing something from him, or by cheating him, or by lying about something that has been lost, and swearing that you did not find it, when you sin in any of these ways, you must repay whatever you got by dishonest means. On the day you are found guilty, you must repay the owner in full, plus an additional 20%. You shall bring to the priest as your repayment offering to the Lord a male sheep or goat without any defects. I'm sorry, I'm tired this morning apparently. Its value is to be determined according to the official standard. The priest shall offer the sacrifice for your sin, and you will be forgiven. The Lord commanded Moses to give Aaron and his sons the following regulations for burnt offerings. A burnt offering is to be left on the altar all night long, and the fire is to be kept burning. The priest, wearing his linen robe and linen shorts, shall remove the greasy ashes left on the altar and put them at the side of the altar. Then he shall change his clothes and take the ashes outside the camp to a ritually clean place. The fire on the altar must be kept burning and never allowed to go out. Every morning the priest shall put firewood on it, arrange the burnt offering on it, and burn the fat of the fellowship offering. The fire must always be kept burning on the altar and never allowed to go out. The following are the regulations for grain offerings. An Aaronite priest shall present the grain offered to the Lord in front of the altar. Then he shall take a handful of the flour and oil, and the incense on it, and burn it on the altar as a token that all of it has been offered to the Lord. The odor of this offering is pleasing to the Lord. The priest shall eat the rest of it. It shall be made into bread baked without yeast and eaten in a holy place, the courtyard of the tent of the Lord's presence. The Lord has given it to the priest as their part of the food offerings. It is very holy, like the sin offerings and the repayment offerings. For all time to come, any of the male descendants of Aaron may eat it as their continuing continuing share of the food offered to the Lord. Anyone else who touches a food offering will be harmed by the power of its holiness. The Lord gave Moses the following regulations for the ordination of an Aaronite priest. On the day he is ordained, he shall present as an offering to the Lord 2 pounds of flour, the same amount as the daily grain offering. Half in the morning and half in the evening. It is to be mixed with oil and cooked on a griddle, and then crumbled and presented as a grain offering, an odor pleasing to the Lord. For all time to come, this offering is to be made by every descendant of Aaron who was serving as a high priest. It shall be completely burned as a sacrifice to the Lord. No part of a grain offering that a priest makes may be eaten. All of it must be burned. The Lord commanded Moses to give Aaron and his sons the following regulations for sin offerings. The animal for a sin offering shall be killed on the north side of the altar, where the animals for the burnt offerings are killed. This is a very holy offering. The priest who sacrifices the animal shall eat it in a holy place, in the courtyard of the tent of the Lord's presence. Anyone or anything that touches the flesh of the animal will be harmed by the power of its holiness. If any article of clothing is spattered with the animal's blood, it must be washed in a holy place. Any clay pot in which meat is boiled must be broken, and if a metal pot is used, it must be scrubbed and rinsed with water. Any male of the priestly families may eat this offering. It is very holy. But if any of the blood is brought into the tent and used in the ritual to take away sin, the animal must not be eaten. It must be burned. Okay. We're going to go ahead and head over to Acts 14. Okay. I'm sorry. I guess I'm Okay, Acts 14 reads, the same thing happened in Iconium. Paul and Barnabas went into the synagogue and spoke in such a way that a great number of Jews and Gentiles became believers. But the Jews who would not believe stirred up the Gentiles and turned them against the believers. The apostles stayed there for a long time, speaking boldly about the Lord, who proved that their message about his grace was true by giving them the power to perform miracles and wonders. The people of the city were divided. Some were for the Jews, the others for the apostles. Then some Gentiles and Jews, together with their leaders, decided to mistreat the apostles and stone them. When the apostles learned about it, they fled to the cities of Lystra and Derbe in Lycaonia, and to the surrounding territory. There they preached the good news. In Lystra there was a crippled man who had been lame from birth, and he had never been able to walk. He sat there and listened to Paul's voice. Paul saw that he believed and could be healed. So he looked straight at him and said in a loud voice, "Stand up straight on your feet." The man jumped up and started walking around. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they started shouting in their own Lycaonian language, "The gods have become like men and have come down to us." They gave Barnabas the name Zeus and Paul the name Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of the god Zeus, whose temple stood just outside the town, brought bulls and flowers to the gate, for he and the crowds wanted to offer sacrifice to the apostles. When Barnabas and Paul heard what they were about to do, they tore their clothes and ran into the middle of the crowd, shouting, Why are you doing this? We ourselves are only human beings like you. We are here to announce the good news, to turn you away from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven, earth, sea, and all that is in them. In the past, he allowed all people to go their own way, but he has always given evidence of his existence by the good things he does. He gives you rain from heaven and crops at the right times. He gives you food and fills your hearts with happiness. Even with these words, the apostles could hardly keep the crowd from offering a sacrifice to them. Some Jews came from Antioch and Pisidia and from Iconium. They won the crowds over to their side, stoned Paul, and dragged him out of the town, thinking that he was dead. But when the believers gathered around him, he got up and went back into town. The next day he and Barnabas went to Derbe. Paul and Barnabas preached the good news in Derbe and won many disciples. They went back to Lystra, to Iconium, and on to Antioch in Pisidia. They strengthened the believers and encouraged them to remain true to faith. We must pass through many troubles to enter the kingdom of God, they taught. In each church they appointed elders, and with prayers and fasting they commended them to the Lord, in whom they had put their trust. After going through the territory of Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. There they preached the message in Perga, and then went to Italia. And from there they sailed back to Antioch, the place where they had been commended to the care of God's grace for the work they had now completed. When they arrived in Antioch, they gathered the people of the church together and told them about all that God had done with them and how he had opened the way for the Gentiles to believe. And they stayed a long time there with the believers. Thank you for tuning in to God Talk. I'm JC, your host. God bless you, and I hope to see you again.